Tonight, we drift quietly into the sun-baked dust and shadow of the Wild West, not to celebrate the sharpshooters or spin legends from lead and leather, but to trace the slower, stranger lives of the men who made violence their business, the outlaws, the gunslingers, the ones whose names were whispered not in admiration, but in warning, who rode with eyes like smoke and hearts that beat to the rhythm of lawlessness. You've heard their stories in louder places, fast-paced, full of standoffs and smoke. But tonight, we tell them differently, with softness, with stillness, with the understanding that even the fiercest outlaw still lay down under the stars. And listen to the wind. These are not stories of glory. They're stories of broken men, of choices made in heat and fear, of hunger and cruelty, and the terrible loneliness that follows those who choose to stand outside the law. So, if your mind has been busy today, let it quiet now. Let the sound of the past settle around you like a slow campfire crackle. And if you enjoy these kinds of tales, odd, unsettling, and just gentle enough to dream to, consider liking, subscribing, and telling me in the comments where you're listening from tonight. What's the weather like where you are? What helps you feel safe when the world outside still spins too fast? Now breathe. Let the weight of the day fall from your shoulders. Let your fingers uncurl. And let's begin with the men whose names were carved not in stone, but in smoke and regret. Clay Weatherby, the man who shot without looking. He didn't speak often, didn't drink much, didn't smile at all. But they said Clay Weatherby could shoot a coin off a fence post from 30 yards, without even glancing at it. He'd tilt his head like he was listening to the air, raise his pistol slow and steady, and fire before most men had even drawn breath. The bullet always hit. Always. No one knew if he'd trained himself or if it was just something broken inside him that turned sharp. Either way, Clay wasn't born into violence. He found it. Or maybe it found him. He grew up in a town with no name, just a cluster of houses where people survived more than they lived. His mother was gone early. His father was mean. And Clay, quiet and pale-eyed, learned fast that silence made you invisible. He worked cattle, broke horses, loaded freight, kept to himself. Until one day, a ranch foreman kicked a dog near him. Clay drew and shot the man in the foot. Didn't run, didn't explain. Just stood there until they fired him and told him to leave. He did. And from then on, Clay lived with the gun. He wasn't a bandit in the usual sense. He didn't rob trains or stagecoaches. He didn't hold up banks. But he killed. Mostly men who tried to cheat him or beat him or threaten someone he liked, which wasn't many. He once walked into a saloon where a deputy was roughing up a girl named Maggie. Clay said nothing, just shot the deputy in the hand, disarmed him, and left without finishing his drink. The law caught up with him eventually, as it always did. He was surrounded near the Pecos River, outnumbered, outgunned, and bleeding from a graze across his ribs. But Clay didn't run. He sat down, back to a tree, eyes half-lidded like he was ready to sleep, and waited. They shouted for him to surrender. He didn't move. One lawman fired. The shot missed. Clay fired back. His bullet hit the lawman's belt buckle and shattered it. No one else fired after that. They waited until dusk. Then a cloud of dust rose in the distance, a storm blowing in, and when it cleared, Clay was gone. Some say he died in Mexico. Some say he joined a group of monks near the border. Others say Maggie found him, and they lived in a shack by the sea. But what most believe, what old-timers swear by, is that Clay wasn't cruel, just hollow, just tired. A man with eyes that saw too much, and a hand that never missed. You wouldn't last a day. Not because he'd shoot you, but because you'd try to talk to him. Ask why. Ask what happened. Ask what the silence meant, and he wouldn't answer. He never did. Because some men aren't running from the law. They're running from the noise. Still, there were signs he wanted peace. He once left a silver dollar by a church door with the words, "Let her rest," scratched into it. No one knows who her was. Maybe his mother, maybe Maggie. Maybe the part of himself he buried the day he pulled that first trigger. Belle McCrea, the widow who rode with wolves. She wasn't always an outlaw, but the West didn't care much for what you were before. It cared who you became when the wind got cold and the law turned its back. Belle McCrea had been a wife once, a school teacher twice, and a preacher's daughter forever. But after her husband was hanged for a crime he didn't commit, after she watched the town eat lemonade and clapped their hands as the rope went taut, something inside her slipped sideways, and she never taught children again. Instead, she learned to shoot. At first, they laughed. A woman in a long black coat, riding alone with a rifle across her lap. But they stopped laughing when she took down a bounty hunter who called her a liar in front of a tavern full of men. One clean shot to the shoulder, not fatal, but final enough. She didn't want to kill. She just wanted them to stop asking questions. Over time, Belle drew others like her. The broken, the orphaned, the wrongfully accused, women mostly, a few men. They rode without colors, without flags, just a band of wolves in dust-stained clothes, watching the horizon like it owed them something. They robbed banks, but only those run by men who'd ruined towns. They took from payroll wagons that belonged to rail companies known for swallowing land and leaving graves behind. They didn't kill unless they had to, but when they did it clean. The papers called her the mourning widow, said she wore a veil even when she shot, said she never stayed in one place long and never left anyone behind. No one could prove the stories, of course. The rail agents tried, sent Pinkertons after her. Belle led them into the canyons and left them there. Horses spooked. Maps vanished. Their own echo, the only answer they got. But Belle wasn't angry forever. At least, that's what people say. In the winter of 1889, a rancher in Colorado claimed she and her riders showed up at his barn during a blizzard. They didn't rob him. They fixed his fence, fed his cattle, left behind a stack of firewood and a note carved into the door that read, "Let the land forgive what the law can't." The handwriting, they said, was perfect, like a teacher's. She disappeared not long after. No arrest, no grave, just rumors. Some say she rode north into the cold and never came back. Others say she took a train east under a false name and lived the rest of her life reading poetry to strangers. But now and then, someone claims to have seen her. Older, slower, but still watching from the edges of town like a ghost with unfinished business. You wouldn't last a day, not because Belle would hurt you, but because she'd see right through you. She'd ask what you've lost. She'd ask why your eyes don't match your words. She'd know the pain you carry without you saying a word. And that kind of seeing, it's heavier than any bullet. Still, she wasn't cruel. She left coins in church baskets, sent books to orphanages. And once, in Kansas, someone found a note in a borrowed Bible. God doesn't ride with the winners. He rides with the broken. Signed only with a B. Elijah Crow, the preacher who killed on Sundays. His name was whispered in places where even the bravest men lowered their voices. Elijah Crow, a preacher by trade, a killer by habit, and something else entirely when the sun set behind the church steeple. No one knew where he came from. He just showed up one spring, riding a black mule and carrying a Bible bound in snakeskin. He wore no collar, but spoke like God had loaned him thunder. And when he preached, people listened. Not because he saved souls, but because they were afraid not to. He started in a small town near the border, a place so poor the graveyard grew faster than the crops. Elijah took over the chapel after the last minister drank himself into the river. He fixed the roof, replanted the garden, gave sermons with fists clenched like judgment itself. But on Sundays, something shifted. That was when he disappeared. Every week, after the benediction, after the hymn, after the people bowed their heads and prayed for rain or mercy or something softer than the lives they knew, Elijah would ride out into the hills, and someone who'd done wrong would die. The first was a man who'd beaten his daughter half to death and walked free because the sheriff owed him money. Elijah found him hanging upside down from a tree, throat opened clean, Bible verses pinned to his chest. The town gasped, called it vengeance. Some called it justice. But Elijah never said a word, just showed up the next Sunday and preached from the same pulpit, voice calm, eyes like storm clouds. Over time, they knew what to expect. A drunk who ran over a child and fled, gone. A rancher who poisoned the creek and blamed the neighboring tribe, vanished. The deaths were always quiet, always brutal, and always came with scripture, not written in blood, written in ink, always neat, always specific, like each verse had been chosen long before the crime. People stopped confessing, stopped gossiping, even stopped sinning, if only out of fear. But no one turned Elijah in, because in a place where the law was brittle and the world was mean, he offered something else, certainty, not kindness, not grace, but the guarantee that the wicked would not sleep easy. Then, one Sunday, he vanished too. The chapel doors were open. The Bible still sat on the pulpit, but Elijah's mule was gone, and so was he. No body was ever found, just a set of boot prints that led into the mountains and disappeared at the edge of a cliff. Some say he fell. Some say he jumped. Some say he was never a man at all, just a vessel for judgment, borrowed and spent. But in towns all across the West, preachers still tell stories about him. Warn sinners that the crow might fly again, and every now and then, someone finds a verse pinned to a barn door. No blood, no body, just the warning. You wouldn't last a day, not because of his judgment, but because you'd want to understand him. You'd try to talk him out of it. You'd say forgiveness is stronger than fear. That faith should heal, not hunt. But Elijah never listened. He believed in a different gospel, one written in silence and grit. Still, maybe there was more to him. He once left a loaf of bread and a jar of honey on a widow's porch after her son died. No note, just kindness, unexpected and quiet. And maybe, just maybe, beneath all that wrath, there was a man who'd lost too much. A man who needed justice to have a name. Johnny Two Toes Harrow, the boy who shot his way out of childhood. He wasn't born bad. No one is. But Johnny Harrow was born unlucky. And in the Wild West, that was just as dangerous. His mother died in childbirth. His father vanished before Johnny could speak. Raised by his aunt in a town that forgot children needed gentleness, Johnny grew up fast. Too fast. He learned to lie before he learned to read, learned to aim before he learned to trust. And by the time he was 14, they were already calling him Two Toes. After the day, he lost 3 of them in a failed train heist that wasn't even his idea. He wasn't tall, wasn't mean either, just quiet, like he was always waiting for something worse to happen. And it usually did. By 16, Johnny had a reputation. Not as a killer, not yet, but as a kid you didn't cross. He rode with older men who saw him as a kind of mascot, a charm, or a reminder of how young they'd once been before they started losing their names to crime and fire. They taught him how to shoot, how to run, how to survive, but they couldn't teach him how to be soft. That part had already been burned out of him. The first time he killed, it was an accident. A deputy in Dry Cross tried to grab him. Johnny panicked, pulled the gun without thinking, and the man dropped where he stood. There was blood on the street and shock on Johnny's face. He didn't cry. He just ran. That became a pattern, a growing list of faces behind him, and fewer options ahead. But he didn't enjoy the violence. That was the strange part. He would apologize, sometimes, after a job went wrong. He would leave coins for the families. He once rode an entire day back to a town just to bury a man who'd been left in the mud. Said the dead should at least have a name. Said it in a whisper, like he wasn't sure it was allowed. People hunted him, always. But they never found him for long. He moved like smoke, small, fast, hard to pin down, and every time someone came close, Johnny disappeared into the canyons, or changed his name, or rode under a blanket of stars with no destination. He died young, 23 maybe less. No grave, no last words. Just a rumor that his body was found leaning against a tree with a flower tucked into the barrel of his pistol. Some say he did it himself. Others say someone showed him mercy. Either way, his story ended quietly. Not in a blaze, in a hush. You wouldn't last a day. Not because of what he did, but because you'd see the boy still inside him. You'd ask where his mother was. You'd ask who taught him that violence was the only way to be seen, and you'd cry when you realized no one had. He taught himself. Still, people remember him kindly. There's a children's home near Santa Fe named after a John Harrow. No one knows if it's him. But in the courtyard, there's a statue, a small figure holding a flower in one hand and a lopsided cowboy hat in the other. And written at the base are the words, "We are not our worst day. Silas Boone, the man with a coffin for a horse." They say Silas Boone rode with death long before he ever killed a man. Tall, gaunt, always dressed in black, with eyes that never blinked long enough for comfort. Silas earned his name not for how he died, but for how he lived. Because what trailed behind his saddle wasn't a pack mule or a bedroll. It was a coffin. Real wood, iron latches, painted matte to keep the sun from gleaming off it. No one knew why he dragged it from town to town. Some said it was his brother's. Some said it was empty. Others swore they'd seen him talk to it, whispering in the dead hours of the night. But whatever was in that coffin, it followed him like a shadow on four legs, mounted to a wheeled cart he'd built himself. And wherever Silas went, people died. He didn't kill for gold, not for land, not even for revenge. Silas Boone killed for silence. He believed the world had grown too loud, too crowded, too dishonest. He would walk into saloons, place a single silver coin on the bar, and say nothing. If the bartender spoke first, Silas walked out. If the bartender asked his name, Silas stayed. And someone, somewhere, wouldn't see another sunrise. He once killed a man for singing too loud, another for bragging about a woman he'd mistreated. No warnings, just the sudden crack of his rifle, long and lean, always wrapped in oilcloth to protect it from desert dust. He was methodical, he was patient, and he was utterly alone. There were rumors, of course, that he'd been wronged in some war, that he'd lost a child and built the coffin with his own hands, that every man he killed reminded him of the one who started it all. But Silas never told his story. He wrote it in the way he walked, in the slow, deliberate care with which he saddled his horse, in the way his boots never made a sound on wood floors. He carried no photographs, no keepsakes, only the rifle, the coffin, and a handkerchief that smelled faintly of lavender, too clean a scent for a man covered in dust. A bounty was placed on his head more than once, but no one collected. One hunter claimed he had a clear shot, aimed from a ridge, And just as he was about to fire, the coffin swung around and stared at him. No eyes, no face, just the sense that something inside knew he was there. The hunter ran, gave up his badge, and moved back east, never picked up a rifle again. Another said Silas spoke to the dead, said he could tell you how your mother died just by looking at your hands. It wasn't magic, they said, just the kind of knowing that only comes from carrying too much grief for too long. When Silas finally died, if he did, it wasn't in a blaze. It was in the middle of the road outside a town called Bitter Hollow. He was found lying beside his horse, the coffin lid open, nothing inside. No wounds, no signs of struggle. Just gone. As if the thing he'd been chasing had finally caught up. They buried him on the edge of town, under a twisted mesquite tree. Someone carved the words, "Let silence have him," into the bark. The coffin was burned. Or maybe it wasn't. Some say it still rolls through the hills, pulled by no horse, always searching. You wouldn't last a day. Not because Silas would kill you, but because you'd want to know what was inside that box. You'd look. You'd knock. You'd ask questions no one else dared ask. And in a world like that, curiosity isn't brave. It's fatal. Still, there are softer parts to his legend. A little girl in New Mexico claimed she saw him leave a doll by her door. Her mother had died the week before. The doll had a name stitched into its dress, Mercy. A man in Utah swore he found Silas praying at sunrise, hands shaking, face streaked with tears. When the man tried to speak, Silas whispered, "Too loud," and walked into the dust. The coffin is closed. The road is empty. The wheels no longer turn. There is no death at your door, no rifle in the dark, no whisper of lavender in the wind, just the still hush of a world that has nothing left to chase. Let the questions drift. Let the legends rest. You are not being followed. You are not being watched. You are far from Bitter Hollow, far from the edge of the law, far from the footsteps of a man who mistook silence for peace. Close your eyes. Let the mystery go. Let the dust settle. There is nothing left in the box. Only breath. Only sleep. Only the knowledge that some stories don't need to be finished to be understood.
Ruth Delgado, the girl with the gold revolver?
She wasn't supposed to be dangerous. Not with freckles, not with braids, not with a voice like Sunday morning. But Ruth Delgado learned early that no one protected the quiet ones, and so she became her own protection. She was 15 the first time she pulled the gold revolver, 17 when she stopped hesitating, 20 when she made her name known across 4 territories, a name that made marshals shift in their saddles and gamblers lower their bets, not because she was cruel, but because she was precise, controlled, the kind of calm that came just before the gunfire or the storm. The revolver had been her mother's, or so the story goes. Passed down by a woman who'd survived the border wars and taught Ruth to shoot as soon as she could steady her hands. It wasn't flashy, except for the finish, but it gleamed even in the dullest light. 5 shots. Ruth never needed more. She wore it not at her hip, but tucked into a worn leather holster under her coat, as if hiding it gave her power. And it did, because when it appeared, it was already too late for whoever stood in front of it. She started as a stagecoach guard, riding beside the driver with her feet planted firm, eyes scanning the horizon like she was reading a language only she understood. When the coach was attacked by a gang of 5 near Fort Griffin, she waited until the dust settled, then stepped down and shot 3 of them where they stood. The other 2 ran. No words, no screams, just stillness after the storm. After that, she became legend. The Gold Ghost, some called her. Others called her Saint Ruth A joke at first, but then a warning. Because she never shot first unless someone needed protecting. A child, a worker, a woman running from a man twice her size. Ruth had a code, and she lived by it with such devotion that even outlaws paused before crossing her. Once, a saloon keeper tried to short a bartender on wages. Ruth bought a drink, waited for the man to count his till, then laid her revolver on the bar and said, "Try again." The money was paid in full by sundown, but she was hunted all the same. A woman with a gun, with agency, with no husband to soften the image. The world couldn't stand it. Bounties were drawn. Men bragged about taking her down before they'd even seen her face. None of them succeeded. A few disappeared. One came back with a bullet lodged in the grip of his own revolver. Ruth's way of saying, "Next time, it'll be the chamber." She vanished at 29, rode south with a caravan, then peeled off near El Paso. Her horse was found months later, tied to a post near an old chapel, with a sprig of lavender tied to its mane and the gold revolver missing from its saddle. Some think she laid it down, chose peace. Others think she died quietly, finally caught by someone quicker. But there's a rumor, barely whispered, that she became a teacher in a village just across the border. That she taught girls how to read, how to aim, how to never lower their voice unless they chose to. No one knows for sure. But a few old women, wrinkled and sharp-eyed, have been known to smile when asked about her, as if they remember something no one else was meant to know. You wouldn't last a day, not because Ruth would shoot you, but because you'd underestimate her. You'd mistake quiet for weakness. You'd speak over her. You'd ignore her eyes. And then, too late, you'd realize that calm isn't the absence of power. It's the evidence of it. Still, she left traces of kindness. A girl in Texas swore Ruth left her a pair of boots on her porch the night after her father passed. A boy in Arizona said he found a copper bracelet with the word "enough" etched into it, left beside the well where he'd been bullied the week before. These weren't weapons. They were reminders. Ruth fought not for glory, but for room, for space to be left alone, or loved, or free. The revolver is hidden. The saddle is empty. The trail has gone cold. No shots will ring out tonight. No dust rises behind you. Only stillness. Only the faint memory of gold glinting in a quiet hand. Let the legend rest. Let her ride on, wherever she went. You are not in her sights. You are not the enemy. You are the silence after the last echo fades. You are the peace she earned, but never trusted. Close your eyes. Let the ghosts fade. Let the weight of the pistol slip from your thoughts. There is no code to follow tonight. No wrong to right. No danger waiting. Only sleep. Only breath. Only you, unthreatened, safe, and seen. Amos Finch, the gravedigger who buried the living. Amos Finch never liked the sun. He worked at night mostly. Slow and deliberate, digging holes no one else wanted to dig, whistling low tunes that had no words and no rhythm, just breath passing through broken teeth. He was the town gravedigger in a place called Prospect Ridge, a mining settlement so dry, even the shadows cracked. Amos had a limp, a bent back, and a face like driftwood left too long in the river. People avoided him, thought he smelled like earth and ghosts, thought he liked the dead more than the living. And maybe he did. For 20 years, he dug graves. He was precise, measured, never rushed. He kept a little book with names and dates, even when no one asked him to. He'd leave a flower on the mound, even if the body came from the jailhouse. But somewhere along the line, something shifted in Amos. No one noticed at first. Just small things. The way he'd mutter to himself when the wind picked up. The way he started carving little wooden markers for people who hadn't died yet. He'd sit outside the church, watching people pass, scratching their names into the wood with the tip of a nail. Always quiet, always smiling. The sheriff dismissed it as eccentricity, said Amos had seen too many bodies and not enough kindness. But the missing started soon after. A drifter first, then a ranch hand, then a woman who'd argued with the judge too loudly at the general store. They just vanished. No gunshots, no fights, no tracks. But the ground near the far side of the cemetery always looked newly disturbed, fresh, turned, soft in a place where the earth hadn't been soft in years. When the deputy finally asked, Amos just looked up from his shovel and said, "Some folks die before they stop breathing." That night, the deputy packed his things and rode east, never came back. The town tried not to speak of it, tried not to look too hard at the far edge of the cemetery, but everyone knew, and no one stopped him. Then came the preacher's son, loud, brash, too sure of his own safety. He taunted Amos in the street one morning, called him a ghoul, dared him to smile. And Amos did, smiled wide, said, "You'll rest soon enough, boy." That night, the preacher's son vanished. And in the cemetery, a fresh grave bore a marker. Micah, returned to the quiet. That was the last straw. A few brave men gathered with lanterns and spades. They waited until Amos was asleep, if he ever really slept, and dug. The ground gave too easily, and inside the third grave, they found Micah, alive, barely. Eyes wild, throat raw from screaming, nails cracked from clawing. He lived, but he was never the same. Couldn't speak afterward, couldn't be touched. And Amos, he was gone. No horse, no footprints. Just a single page from his little black book left behind. It read, "The world is too loud. I make it quiet." No one ever saw him again. But sometimes, in nearby towns, graves appeared overnight, perfectly dug, marked with names no one recognized. And every so often, a man with a limp was spotted in the distance, whistling that same broken tune. You wouldn't last a day, not because Amos would bury you, but because you'd try to talk to him. Try to remind him the living are worth saving. You'd tell him silence isn't peace. You'd try to dig him out of the hole he'd put himself in. But Amos was already too deep. He'd stopped believing in second chances a long time ago. Still, he wasn't without mercy. One woman, old and dying, asked to be buried by him, said she wanted to rest in ground that had been touched by hands that understood loneliness. He gave her a grave lined with wild flowers. No marker, just a single stone with the word "Hush" etched deep. The shovels are still. The graves are empty. No one is watching. No one is waiting. The night is quiet, but not in the way Amos made it. In the kind way, in the safe way. You are not being measured. You are not being named. You are only drifting, only resting. Let the earth stay firm beneath you. Let the dead keep their stories. Let your breath be all that matters. You are above the ground, alive, whole, and safe. Close your eyes. No dirt on your hands. No whispers in the wind. Just stillness. Just peace. Just sleep. Jedediah Knox, the banker who robbed himself. It's one thing to be an outlaw. It's another thing entirely to play both sides of the law until no one, not even you, remembers which side you started on. Jedediah Knox wore suits too fine for the frontier. Silk ties, polished boots, rings with stones that shimmered like desert heat. He was a banker by trade, a gentleman by appearance, and a liar by blood. Came to the West with a satchel full of papers and promises. Opened a bank in a town that didn't yet have a church, and offered loans, like candy to starving men. They called him a miracle at first. A blessing? Said he saved the town. And for a while, it looked like he had. But Jedediah didn't build fortunes. He built traps. He'd offer credit to farmers knowing the land would fail. He'd give generous terms to miners knowing the vein had already gone dry. And when the payments stopped coming, he'd seize the land, the cattle, the tools, even the clothes off a man's back. The law never blinked, because the law owed him money, too. But it wasn't enough to break men quietly. Jedediah wanted a show. He liked the spectacle of foreclosure. Would sit on the porch of the bank with a glass of bourbon, watching a family load up their wagon and drive off into nowhere. He'd offer a toast as they passed. Say, next time, read the fine print. There were whispers that he paid men to burn down barns just before auction days, that he'd arranged for a widow's well to be poisoned so she'd have no choice but to sell. The town grew bitter, but Jedediah was smart. Too smart. He always had the papers in order, always had a witness, always had an alibi. Until one day, the bank was robbed. Clean. Not a single coin left in the vault. No sign of forced entry. No witnesses. No tracks. Just an open safe, an empty drawer, and a note left on his desk. Now you owe you. People smiled in secret, thought someone had finally beaten him at his own game. But Jedediah didn't press charges, didn't call the sheriff, didn't even flinch. He just smiled that thin smile of his and went right on working, as if nothing had happened. But he didn't rebuild the vault. He didn't replace the money. And he didn't stop dressing like a man made of gold. That's when people realized Jedediah had robbed his own bank, emptied it clean, blamed no one, and walked away richer than before. It was a performance. One last trick. One last lie. But tricks like that wear thin, and the people he ruined never forgot. One night, the bank caught fire. No one tried to save it. Flames curled through the roof, licking at the ledgers, the vault, the chair where he'd once toasted his power. And when the ashes cooled, Jedediah was gone. Not dead, just gone. No body, no trail, just a scorched ring on the floor where his bourbon glass had melted into the wood. They say he rides still, in a carriage too fine for any road, pulled by black horses with coins over their eyes. He stops in ghost towns, offers loans no one can repay, and when you try, the coins melt in your hands. Because he doesn't want payment. He wants debt, the kind that festers, the kind you pass on to your children, the kind that doesn't come in paper or gold. You wouldn't last a day, not because he'd trick you, but because you'd try to hold him accountable. You'd say fairness matters. You'd say no man should profit from the suffering of others. And he'd nod, pour you a drink, and offer you a deal you couldn't afford to sign. Because he didn't believe in justice. Only leverage. Still, some say he regretted it. That near the end, he sent coins in the mail to the families he'd ruined, each wrapped in velvet, with a note that said, "I remember." One woman buried hers in the garden, said she didn't want his money, but she liked the apology. The bank is ash. The deals are dust. The ledger has burned away, and your name is not on any line. There is no interest here. No debt chasing your dreams. No man behind a desk waiting to smile when you lose. Let the fire fade. Let the gold tarnish. Let the power turn to paper in the wind. You are not bought. You are not borrowed. You owe nothing. Close your eyes. Let the last coin drop. Let the vault door swing shut behind you. And rest, rich in breath, and safe from every contract the past ever tried to bind you with. Clementine Voss, the bride who never took her veil off. They said she came from the East, but No one knew exactly where. One day, the stagecoach rolled into the town of Mercy Gulch, and out stepped a woman dressed in gray silk, veil drawn low over her face, a bouquet of dried roses clutched in one gloved hand. She didn't speak to anyone, didn't smile, just walked straight to the hotel and paid in coins older than the war. The clerk asked her name, and she said, in a voice soft as candle smoke, "Mrs. Voss." But no one had seen her arrive with a husband. The veil never lifted. Not at breakfast, not at church, not even in the heat of summer when others peeled off their layers just to breathe. She walked the town in silence, never rushing, always graceful, like she was gliding through a dream the rest of the world didn't belong to. Children watched her with wide eyes. Women whispered. Men stared too long and said too little. And when someone asked where her husband was, she would simply say, "He's waiting," and change the subject. But it wasn't just the mystery that unnerved people. It was the deaths. 3 men died in the weeks after she arrived. The first was found in the stable, throat crushed like it had been caught in a closing door. Only no door was broken. The second was a gambler, full of liquor and arrogance, who'd laughed a little too loud at Mrs. Voss during supper. He was found in the alley behind the saloon, with a playing card shoved into his mouth and his eyes wide open. The third was the sheriff himself, a man too used to getting what he wanted. He'd tried to pull back her veil in the middle of the street, said it was his right to know who was walking among his people. She didn't resist, didn't move, just stood there while he reached. His hand never made it. He dropped dead mid-step. Heart stopped. No mark on him. The doctor called it fright. After that, no one asked her anything. The townsfolk grew quiet when she passed. The preacher crossed himself. A few families packed up and left, saying they didn't want to raise children in a place where death followed the hem of a woman's dress. But Mrs. Voss stayed. Each morning, she placed a fresh flower on the hotel windowsill. Each evening, she walked to the edge of town and stood there, watching the horizon, waiting, always waiting. They say her lips moved sometimes, like she was praying, or remembering, or whispering to someone who wasn't there. Then one day, she was gone. Room empty. Roses wilted. Not a trace left behind except the veil, carefully folded and left on the bed, and a note in handwriting so neat it looked printed. It said, "I kept the vow, even when the grave could not." No one knows what it meant, but the hotel room she stayed in was never rented again. Not because it was haunted, but because it felt respected, like stepping into someone else's memory and knowing you don't belong. You wouldn't last a day. Not because she'd harm you, but because you'd want to know what she was mourning. You'd want to lift the veil, see the face behind the legend, and you'd forget that sometimes the veil isn't hiding something terrible. Sometimes it's hiding something too tender to survive in the open. Still, there are gentle endings to her story. A diary found in an abandoned church held a passage about a woman in gray who appeared when widows were at their loneliest, who held their hands and listened, who didn't speak, but somehow understood everything. One widow wrote, "She never showed her face, but I felt seen." The veil has been folded. The roses have turned to dust. The wind carries no names tonight. You are not being watched. You are not being mourned. You are here, alive, breathing, with no vows to keep and no ghosts to soothe. Let her rest. Let her love be her own. Let the mystery stay whole, untouched, and safe in silence. Close your eyes. No silk brushing your cheek. No shadow at the edge of the bed. Only you, warm and quiet, with no veil between you and the night. Let the candle go out. Let the breath go deep. And sleep, knowing some hearts are buried not in graves, but in promises kept long after the world forgets. Orville the butcher maze, the hangman who enjoyed his work. He was the last man you wanted to see at dawn. Tall, stiff, dressed all in brown, with a noose always slung over his shoulder like it was part of his uniform. Orville Mays didn't speak unless spoken to, didn't drink, didn't gamble. He showed up the night before a hanging, measured the drop, inspected the wood, nodded to the sheriff, and went to bed without a word. But everyone who met him said the same thing. He smiled too much. He wasn't always the hangman. Once, long ago, he was a butcher, had a small shop near a river in Arkansas, sold meat so fine people traveled miles for it. But one day, something changed. A bad flood rolled through, took half the town and most of his family. He stayed, opened the shop again, but the cuts weren't the same. The meat was too clean, too quiet. People started whispering. The shop burned down soon after. No one said how. Orville left town that week. When he showed up again years later, he had a rope in his hands and a certificate in his coat pocket that said he was now certified to execute justice. He worked across 5 territories, traveled with his own tools, sharpened the trapdoor hinges himself, carved the names of every man he'd hanged into the inside of his boots. Not the soles, but the lining, so only he could feel them with each step. When asked how many he'd done, he'd shrug and say, "Enough to know the weight," then smile like he just made a toast. But he didn't just do his job. He relished it, chose the last words if the condemned didn't speak, arranged the crowd so everyone had a view, offered handkerchiefs to widows, not out of kindness, but out of etiquette. He once hung 2 brothers side by side and whistled a hymn while he tied the knots. One sheriff asked him if he ever had trouble sleeping. Orville replied, "I sleep just fine. It's the living who toss and turn." People began to fear the sound of wheels on gravel at night, afraid he'd arrived for someone they knew. Children were told to behave or the butcher'll come and weigh your neck. And yet, no one could prove he ever hanged a man who didn't deserve it. That was the trick. He never stepped outside the law, just stood right at the edge, toes curled, staring into the darkness beyond, with something close to delight. He disappeared after a botched execution in Dead Elm. The rope snapped. The man survived. And Orville, for the first time, froze. Didn't speak. Didn't try again. He walked down the steps of the gallows, placed the rope on the ground, and rode away. Some say the man was his cousin. Others say Orville finally saw himself in the condemned. Either way, he was never seen again. Just gone. Like dust off a ledge. But sometimes, late at night, Gallows Creek, where no gallows stand, a noose swings in an empty barn. A boot print shows up under the wrong window. People say he still walks, waiting for a rope to tighten, waiting for a crime to punish. Not because it's needed, but because he doesn't know how to be anything else. You wouldn't last a day, not because he'd kill you, but because you'd try to see the man behind the rope. You'd ask him why, ask what the flood took from him, ask what he thought the hangings gave back. And he'd laugh, soft and joyless, and say, "Nothing ever comes back." Still, he left behind a journal. 1 page, 1 entry. I tied them right. That's all they asked. Maybe that was how he justified it, by pretending it was all just craft, like carpentry or stonework, just knots and weights and timing. The gallows are empty. The rope is slack. The boots have stopped walking. There are no eyes measuring your height, no hands folding the cloth, no smile waiting behind the hood. Let the wood be just wood again. Let the noose stay coiled in the corner. You are not judged. You are not condemned. You are the breath before the silence, the heartbeat that goes uncounted. Close your eyes. No last words. No steps to the platform. Just the soft creak of the past moving away. sleep, weightless and untouched. Let the rope rot. Let the name fade. Let justice belong to better men. Mabel Snakebite Renner, the saloon girl who poisoned a posse. In the dim haze of lantern light and spilled whiskey, Mabel Renner looked like anyone else. Just another saloon girl with bright eyes and a laugh made for coaxing coins from lonely men. But the regulars at the Pale Moon Saloon knew better. They watched how she moved without making sound, how she poured drinks with one hand and palmed something into her sleeve with the other, how her smile stopped just short of her eyes. She'd been there for years, it seemed. Or maybe she'd just always been there, the way snakes always seem to belong to the dirt they rise from. They called her Snakebite, not because she was quick, but because she was patient and lethal if provoked. She didn't wear perfume. She wore tobacco oil and clove, something sharp that lingered. Men who crossed her never said so twice. Some left town, some didn't leave at all. One gambler, slick with borrowed charm and the stink of cheating, tried to touch her wrist without asking. She served him a drink with something extra in it. Nothing fatal, but enough to keep him on the floor for 2 days, muttering about snakes in his boots. He left barefoot, babbling, never to be seen again. But the story that gave her legend, the one people whispered about long after the saloon burned down, was the night of the posse. 5 men, armed and loud, rode into town looking for a boy who'd stolen a horse from a rancher 2 counties over. The boy was 14, scared, and hiding behind the saloon with a busted lip and no saddle. The posse didn't care, said they had a right to hang him where he stood, said the law was too slow, and their justice would be quicker. They drank hard that night, slammed their fists on tables, tossed coins at the barkeep like they were feeding a beast. Mabel watched, didn't flinch, didn't blink, just poured their drinks and smiled. No one knows what she used. Some said belladonna, others said scorpion venom brewed into bitters. Whatever it was, by morning, 3 were dead. The 4th clawed at his throat until his fingernails broke. The 5th wandered into the desert, laughing and bleeding from the ears, and was found days later with his boots off and his tongue missing. The boy lived, rode out the next day on a mule someone left for him by the river. No one ever said who. Mabel didn't run. She stayed, wore her same red dress, cleaned the glasses like nothing had happened. When the sheriff finally asked if she knew anything, she tilted her head and said, "Funny thing about poison, it only works if you swallow it." And that was the end of the investigation. But she didn't stay forever. After the fire, started by accident or on purpose, no one could agree. She vanished. Some say she moved south and opened her own place, where the drinks were strong and the men were careful. Others think she was hired by someone rich and cruel to handle problems no gun could solve. But there are still bars with a stool no one sits in, and a bottle on the top shelf with a handprint that won't wipe away. You wouldn't last a day, not because Mabel would poison you, but because you'd ask the wrong questions. You'd try to save her. Call her a victim. Call her lonely. You'd forget that some women didn't want saving. Some became dangerous because the world gave them no other shape to take. Still, she wasn't without kindness. An old woman in Texas says Mabel once left her a sack of flour and a vial of something sweet that cured her cough. A preacher's wife claimed she prayed with Mabel once behind the saloon, said her hands were steady and her voice was low but sincere, and someone, years later, found a note scrawled into the back of a broken mirror. They only called it poison because I was the one holding the glass. The saloon is quiet. The bottles are empty. The girl in red is gone. There's no venom in your cup. No laughter laced with warning. Only breath. Only rest. Let the past fall like ash. Let the danger drift like smoke. You are not being watched. You are not being tested. You are safe. Throat unburned, stomach calm. Let Mabel go. Let her find her next town, her next card to play. Close your eyes. No bite, no sting. Just the peace of knowing some legends survive, not because they were feared, but because they refused to be forgotten. Sleep now. The poison's all gone. Enoch Grady, the tracker who hunted for the wrong side, he could find anyone. That's what they said, and they weren't wrong. Enoch Grady had a talent, or a curse, for following signs no one else saw. A scuff on a rock, a bit of bent grass, the way a bird took flight. He could read the land like it whispered to him, and more often than not, it whispered blood. He didn't talk much, chewed tobacco like it was penance, rode a wiry black horse with one blind eye, and carried a rifle older than he was. They hired him when the trail was cold, when the law gave up, when even dogs couldn't catch a scent. He never asked why he was chasing someone, just asked where they'd been last seen. That was his code. Follow the signs. Bring them in. Take the coin. But somewhere along the way, the coin started to matter more than the truth. Enoch began hunting people who shouldn't have been hunted. A man who owed money to the wrong merchant. A woman who ran from a marriage arranged by her father. A child, no more than 13, who'd been accused of stealing a watch. Never mind that it was later found under the bed of the man who cried theft. Enoch found them all, always. But something changed after the boy. They said Enoch tracked him for 5 days through the mountains. Through wind and snow, found him curled under a pine tree, coughing and starving, face streaked with tears. Didn't even run when Enoch rode up. Just looked up and asked if it hurt, delivering people back to the ones who meant them harm. Enoch didn't answer. He wrapped the boy in a blanket, took him back, and never said a word. That night, he drank for the first time in years. Poured a full bottle into the dirt beside his fire, like an offering. After that, he started asking questions. Not to his clients, but to himself. Who were these people really? Why were they running? Why were the men with money always the ones who wanted someone found? And why did the trail always seem to end in a rope, or a beating, or worse? Then came the girl. 16s, accused of setting a fire that had actually started from lightning. Her uncle wanted her back. Said she'd embarrassed the family. Said she needed discipline. Enoch took the job, out of habit more than belief. Found her 3 towns over, working in a bakery, singing to herself as she kneaded dough. She saw him. Didn't run. Just asked, "Did he send you?" Enoch looked at her for a long time, then turned around and rode away. Didn't take the money. Didn't leave a note. Just left the trail cold. After that, he started working backward, finding the ones he'd delivered, leaving horses for them, maps, coins, warnings. One marshal found his own prisoner gone in the morning, with Enoch's rifle propped against the cell and a single word scratched into the door. Wrong. He disappeared not long after. Some say he was shot by a rancher who didn't appreciate the favor being returned. Some say he walked into the canyon and let the wind erase him. Others say he kept riding, not to hunt anymore, but to erase the damage he'd done, one trail at a time. You wouldn't last a day, not because Enoch would hunt you, but because you'd try to thank him. You'd call him a hero. You'd say redemption matters. But he didn't believe in redemption, only in balance, in the slow, painful work of undoing. Still, his rifle was found once, long after he vanished. Tied to it was a pouch of coins and a note that said, "For the girl at the bakery." The handwriting was tight, controlled, like someone who'd learned to be precise in everything, even guilt. Sleep now. The tracker is gone. The trail has faded. The signs point nowhere. You are not being followed. You are not being delivered. You are not a bounty. You are a soul at rest. Let the hoofbeats vanish into the distance. Let the scent of tobacco and pine fade on the wind. Close your eyes. No one's chasing. No one's being chased. Just you, still and safe with no trail left to walk. Sleep. The wrongs of others are not your burden. The hills are quiet now. The path leads only to peace. Tobias Finch, the judge who never left his chair. He was never elected. No vote, no campaign. Just showed up one morning in the courthouse at Dead Lantern Junction, wearing a black coat that buttoned too high and a hat that no one ever saw him take off. Tobias Finch. That's what he called himself. He said he'd studied law back east, though no one found his name in any ledger. He spoke with a strange sort of calm, like he wasn't offering arguments so much as stating facts the world had already agreed on. His voice didn't rise. His hands didn't move. He passed sentence the way some men sip tea, thoughtfully, but with no trace of emotion. They said he was fair at first, precise, too precise. He memorized every law in the county book, quoted it from memory, crossed his legs when he spoke, and stared straight ahead like he could see your soul wearing a sign. If you were innocent, he'd nod once and dismiss you. If you were guilty, he'd tell you how long you'd suffer and why. But it wasn't just what he knew. It was what he didn't forget. One man lied in court, just a small lie, about a date on a receipt. A week later, he was arrested again for perjury. Another tried to bribe the judge's clerk. The next morning, his house was burned down, with a charred note nailed to what remained of the door. Justice keeps its eyes open. No one ever saw Finch leave the courthouse. He never visited the saloon, never stood on the boardwalk, never rode a horse. He was simply there. Every morning, already seated. Every evening, still seated. Then came the case that changed everything. A man named Avery Cullen, rich, respected, and guilty. Everyone knew it. He'd killed a worker in cold blood over a dispute about fence lines, claimed it was self-defense, brought 3 witnesses, bought them, most figured. But Finch listened, asked one question, just one, and when the answer stuttered, when the 3rd witness contradicted the first, he closed the book on the bench and said, "Guilty, to be sentenced before sunrise." The town erupted. The Cullen family stormed the courthouse that night. 3 men with pistols, 1 with a torch. They meant to end it, burn the building, kill the judge. But when they burst into the chamber, Finch was already waiting. Not hiding, not armed, just sitting. Coat perfectly straight, eyes like glass in winter. The fire didn't catch. The pistols jammed. The men fled, and one, the youngest, swore later he heard a voice say, "You'll die the way you lie." That man never spoke again, not a word, for the rest of his life. From then on, the town didn't challenge him. People came from counties over, just to see the judge who never moved. Some came to confess, some just to watch. And still, no one ever saw him eat, or sleep, or blink. A few said he was cursed. Others said he was dead, and that the bench held more than wood beneath it. A traveling preacher once said Finch was proof that the law, when twisted too tightly, becomes a noose. And then one day, the courthouse doors were locked. No trial that morning. No shadow in the window. Inside, the judge's chair was empty, his book closed. And on the bench, a single white feather, clean, untouched, resting on the exact spot where his hand had always sat. You wouldn't last a day, not because Finch would judge you harshly, but because you'd feel it before he spoke. The weight of it, the sense that every secret you've tried to bury is sitting in the open, waiting to be read aloud. You'd want to explain, to justify. But Finch didn't care for justifications, only the truth. And sometimes, the truth is heavier than the sentence. Still, he left peace behind. The town changed after he vanished. They rebuilt the courthouse into a schoolhouse. The children read their books beneath the same beams where once the law had thundered. A teacher found his black coat one day in the attic, folded neatly. Inside the pocket, a stone with the word "enough" carved into it. The gavel is silent. The bench is bare. The eyes that saw too much are closed for good. There are no judgments waiting in the dark, no verdicts whispered into dreams. You are not on trial. You are not the accused. You are simply breathing, simply resting. Let the courtroom fade. Let the laws uncoil. Let the feather drift down, slow and soft. Close your eyes. There is no justice here but sleep. No law but breath. No punishment but remembering too long. You may forget now. You may let go. You are free to rest. Gentle. Josiah Bell, the outlaw who buried his guns. They called him Gentle Josiah because he never raised his voice, even when robbing banks, even when pulling a man off a horse with one hand and knocking him flat with the other. His voice was quiet, syrupy, and slow, like warm molasses poured over a threat. He didn't curse, didn't shout, didn't gloat. He just asked politely for the money, thanked the clerk, and walked out the door like he'd bought bread, not stolen payroll. But the calm was a mask. Beneath the soft smile and tipped hat was a man who had once fought in a war that didn't end when the papers said it did. Josiah came back from that war with a limp, a scar along his ribs, and a hollow in his chest where certainty used to live. He tried to work honest, drove cattle, painted houses, even tried preaching once, but his sermons always drifted off into silence, as if the words fell apart before they reached his mouth. He became an outlaw by degrees. First a little theft, then a little more. Then riding with men who didn't ask questions and didn't stay anywhere long. But Josiah never liked the blood, never liked the noise. So he did it his way. Smooth, calm, and without the cruelty others seemed to enjoy. When he robbed a bank in Waco, he offered candy to a crying child. When a guard reached for his weapon, Josiah simply said, "Don't. I've seen enough death." And the guard lowered his hands. Still, a crime is a crime, and a man can't dodge a wanted poster forever. A bounty was placed on his head, $300 dead or alive. Posses rode out after him, but Josiah was always just ahead, left behind coins for the clerks, notes for the widows, and sometimes wildflowers on the graves of men who died trying to catch him. He was hunted, sure, but he never hunted back. Then came the day he disappeared. Not a shootout, not a capture, just gone. His last known robbery was small, a payroll office with barely enough money to feed a family, and he left most of it behind, took only one bag and a shovel. Years later, a boy digging near a cottonwood grove, you found a box. Inside were 6 pistols, wrapped in oilcloth, each loaded, each clean, and a note, folded like it had been placed there with care. "These have done enough. Let them sleep." The handwriting was even, gentle. Below it, a pressed flower. A daisy, perfectly flattened between waxed paper. No signature. Some say Josiah buried his guns and walked east to start over. Others think he joined a monastery in the hills. There were stories of a soft-spoken man tending orchards and reading by lantern light, never raising his voice, even when the frost came early. but no one really knows. You wouldn't last a day, not because Josiah would hurt you, but because you'd want to believe too badly that people can change. You'd follow his trail through the trees, whispering his name like a prayer. You'd see the guns in the dirt and think that meant peace. But Josiah knew better. He knew that even a buried thing still remembers what it's done. Still, he tried. He left the trail quiet. He let the blood dry and the past rest. He didn't try to write a legend. He just stopped writing altogether. The guns are buried. The posse has turned back. There is no noise on the wind. No footsteps behind you. Only hush. Only the soft breath of a man who chose stillness over fire. Let the pistols rust beneath the roots. Let the wildflowers bloom where violence once slept. You are not hunted. You are not haunted. You are only here, now. Breathing. Whole. Close your eyes. No wanted posters. No stolen gold. No final standoff. Just sleep, gentle and deep, like a man who finally walked away before the smoke cleared. Let the peace last. Let the dirt stay undisturbed. And let your dreams come soft, like daisy petals falling on an old, quiet grave. Nellie Granger, the undertaker's daughter who dug up the truth. She grew up among coffins, small hands tracing wood grain, listening to the hammering of nails like lullabies from the dead. Her father, the undertaker of Sable Creek, was a quiet man who believed in ritual, in respect, in the weight of grief handled carefully. But Nellie was different. She was curious, asked too many questions, wanted to know where the blood went, why some caskets were heavier than others, and why the town sheriff seemed to bury more men than he ever arrested. By the time she was 13, she could measure a body by eye and guess its cause of death better than most physicians. She watched. She listened. She read the entries her father kept in the thick black ledger no one was supposed to open. And what she saw, what she pieced together from the quiet patterns of death, was something the town didn't want found. Because men were dying who shouldn't be. Young men, healthy ones who had gotten too close to certain land deeds, too loud about mine rights, too nosy about the town's books. They always seemed to die in bar brawls or hunting accidents. Always convenient. Always with the same two witnesses, the sheriff and the mayor. Nellie didn't say anything. Not at first. She copied entries from the ledger in secret, drew her own maps, noted the bruises that didn't match the cause, the bullets fired from angles too strange for accidents. She watched her father prepare the bodies and began to see each corpse, not as a mystery, but a message. One no one else wanted to read. Then, one night, she dug someone up. He was buried too fast. A young man named Theo Milner, who'd been about to marry the school teacher and had argued with the mayor the night before he died. They said it was suicide. Nellie didn't believe it. So while the town slept, she dug. Dirt under her nails, breathing shallow. Not out of fear of ghosts, but of being seen. What she found was simple. A bullet. Not a rope. A neat, quiet hole behind the ear. She covered him up again. Said nothing. But everything changed after that. She became a shadow in her own town. Listening at corners, slipping notes to the preacher's wife, drawing diagrams by lamplight. One by one, she exposed the pattern, quietly, strategically. A missing ledger page placed on the mayor's desk during Sunday service. A shell casing left on the sheriff's porch, wrapped in a handkerchief embroidered with his own initials. A whisper in the ear of a passing Pinkerton agent, followed by a map marked in red. And then, just as the investigation began, she vanished. No funeral, no trace. Her father refused to speak of it. just locked her room and nailed her name into the frame above the door like a tombstone. Some say she was killed for what she knew. Others say she escaped, dressed in black, face covered in soot, boarding a freight train with her mother's wedding ring and a pistol tucked into her boot. But every so often, someone in a dusty frontier town finds a note pinned to a fence post. No signature, just the words, "Don't let the grave be the end of the story." You wouldn't last a day, not because of what Nellie uncovered, but because you'd want to stop her. You'd say it's too dangerous. You'd say the truth can wait. You'd tell her to be careful. But Nellie never wanted careful. She wanted honest, even if it meant digging in the dark. Still, she left hope behind. A woman who grew up to be a district judge in Montana swore she got her start from a girl in a dusty dress who taught her how to read autopsy notes and ask better questions. A miner said he found land records in his locker with a flower pressed between the pages. Wild heather, her favorite. The shovel is set down. The graves are still. The secrets have been unearthed and scattered like dust into light. There is no need to search tonight. No bodies calling from beneath the ground. No ledgers hidden from your hands. Only quiet. Only breath. Only rest. Close your eyes. The story is safe now. The lies are undone. And the girl with the dirt-streaked cheeks has walked into legend, lantern held high, still digging, still defiant. Sleep while she keeps watch. Sleep with the truth warm and quiet beside you. Luther Kane, the blacksmith who made weapons he couldn't forgive. His forge was on the edge of town, just far enough from the saloon to avoid the drunks, just close enough to hear when someone screamed. Luther Kane didn't talk much, and when he did, his voice was low and shaped like gravel. Broad-shouldered, skin dark as ash, eyes like tempered steel. He hammered iron the way other men prayed, with rhythm, with purpose, with a silence behind the sound that made people uneasy. He didn't make horseshoes, didn't mend wagon wheels. He made weapons, and only weapons. Knives mostly, sometimes rifles, sometimes brass knuckles with initials carved into the curves. People said his work was too fine for the frontier, the balance too perfect, the edges too precise. He charged too little. Took coin, yes, but sometimes just a loaf of bread or a bottle of clean water, as if the price wasn't in the metal, but in the memory. Because every weapon Luther made had a name, not etched into the blade, but written in a small leather book he kept behind the anvil. He never let anyone read it, said it wasn't for them, but he flipped to it before every job, running a finger down the list like he was checking something off, or adding to it, and every now and then he'd stop making weapons altogether, shut the forge for a day or two, and disappear into the hills. No one knew where he went. He always came back, soot-streaked and silent, eyes even darker than before. People said the weapons he made never missed, that if you held one with both hands and pointed it at a man, fate would do the rest. One outlaw claimed he shot 3 men with one of Luther's pistols and never felt the trigger move. Another swore the knife he bought from the blacksmith hummed in his hand when danger was near. Superstition, maybe, but no one ever threw away a cane blade. Even the lawmen who condemned him kept his weapons hidden in their homes, locked in drawers, wrapped in cloth like relics too holy to destroy. But Luther hated what he made. That was the part no one saw. At night, when the forge cooled and the town slept, he sat behind his shop and stared at his hands like they weren't his. He once told a boy who swept his floor, "There's a ghost in every edge I sharpen." The boy thought he meant bad dreams, but Luther didn't sleep. Not really. The truth came out one spring, after a man returned to town bleeding, dragging a body behind him. The knife in his belt, Luther's, The blood on his coat, familiar. The body, a woman Luther had once given bread to. Quiet, kind, gone. And the man? No remorse. Said the knife did what it was made to do. Luther didn't speak, just took the knife from the man's belt, walked to the forge, lit the fire, and melted it, slowly, quietly, like a funeral with no words. After that, he stopped taking orders. No more blades, no more iron. He built gates, fences, small things, bent the metal without edge. The book disappeared. The forge went cold more often than not. Then one day, he was gone. No note, no packed horse, just the anvil, still warm, and a single, unfinished blade stuck in the coals. Not sharpened, not named, just resting there, waiting for someone who never came back. You wouldn't last a day. Not because Luther would hurt you, but because you'd ask him why he kept forging. You'd see the guilt behind his eyes. You'd want to save him from his own hands. But Luther didn't believe in being saved, only in balancing the weight of what he'd made. Still, they say he tried. A woman in Idaho found a package on her porch, a kitchen knife, simple and clean, and a note that said, "For food, not fear." A blacksmith in Kansas received a pair of hammers made from melted rifle barrels. On the handle, carved into the wood, "Make things that live." The forge is quiet. The coals have cooled. The metal has stopped screaming. You are not a weapon. You are not a name in a leather book. You are only breath, only warmth, only the slow, soft rhythm of someone who has nothing to prove. Let the hammer rest. Let the blade remain unfinished. Let the ghosts in the iron finally sleep. Close your eyes. No edges here. No sharpness. Only peace. Only the night folding gently over the forge, and the hands that once shaped violence now open, waiting for something kinder. Madeline Pike, the widow who burned every map. She wasn't always alone. Once, long ago, she rode beside a man named Thomas Pike, a surveyor who mapped the frontier with ink-stained fingers and a compass he wore like a watch. They traveled from territory to territory, charting rivers, borders, lands the government called unused. But Thomas had a conscience. He knew what those maps were really for, where they would send the rails, and the men with guns, and the judges with pens who turned land into numbers. He started making copies, quiet ones, drawn at night, showing what should be left untouched. The lands of the tribes, the sacred valleys, the quiet hills. He gave them to people who knew how to hide them. Then he died, not from a bullet, not from fever, from silence. He disappeared one day near a river he refused to mark. Madeline knew what had happened. The men from the government came back alone, smiling, sorry. She didn't believe them. She waited a week, then rode out alone, and came back with nothing but his compass, bent at the hinge, and a piece of burned parchment she never showed anyone. From that day on, she became something else. She bought maps, stole them, traded for them, every type, government charts, railroad blueprints, military drafts. She collected them in a small house with a chimney that never stopped smoking. Because every map she found, she burned, one by one. Folded, inked, stitched, or stamped, it didn't matter. If it showed lines where land should breathe, she fed it to the fire. People called her mad. The cartographer's widow said she wore her husband's coat like a shroud and spoke to maps as she dropped them into the flames. Said she'd cursed the railroad, that tracks twisted when they passed her house, that surveyors lost their way when they walked near her land. The army sent a man once to speak with her. He didn't return for 3 days. When he came back, he resigned, took up painting, never went near a compass again. Madeline didn't threaten. She didn't shout. She just watched and burned quietly, deliberately. At night, she'd sit by the fire, embers painting her face in orange light, and whisper stories from the blank spaces. What once grew there, who once danced there, what still lived in the soil beneath the grid. Over time, people came to her, not to stop her, to give her more. A cartographer who'd lost his son to a land dispute gave her his entire collection. A soldier sent her a field map he couldn't bear to carry anymore. A child, barely old enough to write, brought her a page from a school book showing which lands were free for settlement. She burned it, then gave the child a compass that didn't point north. "Let it point to you," she said. "You wouldn't last a day, not because Madeline would harm you, but because you'd ask her to explain. You'd want reasons, dates, names. You'd ask what good it did, burning paper. And she'd look at you with eyes like coals and say, 'They burned what lived. I'm only returning the favor.'" Still, there was peace in her madness, a gentle kind. The fire in her hearth never went out, and yet her garden bloomed year-round. The tribe from the north sent her a bundle of herbs every spring, no note, just a braid of sage tied in silk. Some said she never slept. Others swore she slept more deeply than anyone ever had, because when she closed her eyes, no maps moved, no borders changed. The maps are ashes. The ink has lifted. The lines are gone. There is no grid beneath you, no railroad on your back, no strangers measuring the space where you lie. Only breath. Only the soft whisper of pages turning to smoke. Let the fire crackle. Let the paper curl. Let the silence of the land return. You are not marked. You are not claimed. You are not numbered. You are safe. You are soft. You are here. Close your eyes. Let the blankness stretch wide. Let the compass spin. Let your name remain unrecorded, unwritten, unbothered. There is no path to follow, only peace and sleep. Reverend Silas Dunn, the man who preached to empty chairs. In a little town called Ash Hollow, where the wind made more noise than the people, there stood a chapel with peeling paint and a bell that never rang. It leaned slightly to the left, like it had grown tired of holding its own weight. That's where Reverend Silas Dunn gave his sermons, every Sunday, without fail, at dawn and dusk. But the thing was, no one came. Not anymore. They used to. Years ago, when Silas first arrived, his voice was like thunder wrapped in silk. He spoke of fire, of sin, of the judgment to come. His sermons were sharp, precise, delivered like a man chiseling commandments into the air. People filled the pews, drawn to the certainty in his words. But Silas didn't preach salvation. He preached punishment. Every week, he listed names. Not vague sins, but specifics. You who took more grain than you tithe. You who visit the widow only when the curtains are drawn. You who lie with your silence. At first, folks respected him. Then they feared him. Then they stopped coming. Because somehow, he always knew. Knew what they'd done, or thought about doing, or tried to forget. He never accused, never pointed fingers. Just let the words hang in the air like smoke from a slow fire. Eventually, the pews sat empty. The hymn books gathered dust. But Silas kept preaching, kept writing his sermons in a notebook bound in oxblood leather. Every name he remembered, every act whispered behind doors, every wrong he saw, but never interrupted. They all made it into his words. And though no one sat in those wooden chairs, he looked at them like someone was there, said, "Amen," with tears in his eyes. Asked the silence if it was listening. Some say he lost his mind. Others say he saw what others wouldn't. That sin didn't disappear when the people did. It just got quieter. One night, the chapel burned, quick and clean. No lightning, no storm. Just flames rising from the floorboards like they'd waited years to be freed. By the time anyone got there, the roof had collapsed. Inside, they found the bell, still whole, still silent. And they found the pulpit, charred, but standing. On top of it, Silas's leather notebook, untouched. The pages were filled with names. Hundreds, some from years before, some from towns miles away. And at the very end, a single line. I forgave them all. I just never knew how to say it. No one saw Silas after that. But travelers said they heard a voice in the ruins at dawn, preaching to no one, preaching for everyone. And sometimes, when the wind is just right, the bell rings once, a sound that doesn't echo but settles, like dust, like absolution. You wouldn't last a day, not because Silas would call you out, but because he'd see the part of you even you don't name. You'd sit in the pew and feel seen in a way that didn't hurt, but didn't let you hide either. You'd feel the weight lift and then wonder if you even deserved it. Still, he never wanted pain. He never wanted fear. He just didn't know how else to show that he'd been listening, that he'd been hoping someone would stay, that he believed words, even spoken into emptiness, could matter. The chairs are empty. The chapel is gone. The voice is a whisper in the trees. No names will be spoken tonight. No sins counted. No secrets exposed. Let the sermon fade. Let the fire go out. Let the ashes settle gently over what you've carried too long. Close your eyes. You are not the lie you told. You are not the silence you kept. You are not the shame someone gave you to hold. You are forgiven, even if you don't know why, even if you don't believe it yet. Rest now. The preacher has sat down. The bell will not ring, and the dawn will come soft, without judgment, only light. Cooper Thane, the lawman who chose the wrong side every time. He wore the badge, but no one could say for sure who pinned it on him first. It wasn't official, not really. One day, Cooper Thane just started showing up at crime scenes, asking questions, wearing a coat with a star stitched into the chest. Not the usual tin pinned over the heart, but a star made of leather, dark and quiet, and stitched in tight, like something earned in blood. Folks let it be. The sheriff was always drunk, and Cooper, at least, stayed sober. He walked with a cane, though he never limped. Carried it not for support, but as if it had something inside, weighted perhaps. People noticed he never leaned on it, but when he tapped it once against the floor, men listened. He spoke slowly, called everyone by their first name, even when he was accusing them, especially then. He wasn't cruel. He didn't shout, didn't hit. He just made decisions. Fast, firm, final. And most of the time, they were wrong. He arrested the innocent, let the guilty go, brought back the wrong man from a posse ride and never corrected himself. Claimed a woman had lied about an assault and fined her for disturbing the peace. Said a young boy had stolen from the bank when the teller was the one skimming coins. When asked why he did it, he'd shrug, say the evidence pointed that way, say, sometimes the world picks the guilty for you. As if justice was just a coin toss, and he was holding the weight in his thumb. And yet, no one stopped him. Because he was calm, Because he kept order. Because fear in a pressed coat and clean boots still looked better than chaos. He made people feel safe. Not truly, but enough to pretend. And pretending was cheaper than truth. But Cooper wasn't heartless. That was the problem. He knew what he was doing. You could see it in the way he lingered outside jail cells, staring at the floor like he was waiting for someone to forgive him first. He'd visit the families of those he'd condemned, sit on their porches, and say nothing. Just look at the sky with them. Once, he paid for a child's funeral out of his own pocket. Said it was his fault the wagon never arrived. No one understood what he meant. He kept a journal, though no one ever saw him write in it. Small, bound in dark green leather. Carried it inside his coat, above the heart. When he died, quietly, in a room above the tailor's shop, it was the only thing left beside him. The cane was gone. The star had been torn from his coat. And the book, filled with names. Not the names of the ones he locked up, but the ones he didn't. Names that should have faced justice. Names he let walk. At the end of each entry, the same 3 words. I knew better. They buried him outside town in unmarked soil. No prayer, no song. Just silence and wind. But every year, someone leaves a single nail on his grave. Rusted, bent, as if to say, you held the hammer too long. You wouldn't last a day. Not because Cooper would harm you, but because you'd try to understand him. You'd say he meant well. You'd argue that the world forced his hand, and he'd shake his head just once and say, no, I just chose wrong. And that would be that. Still, in a drawer of the old sheriff's office, they found letters addressed to people long gone. Apologies, money, maps, letters he never sent because some guilt doesn't want to be forgiven, it wants to be carried. The badge is buried. The cane has stopped tapping. The names have been written, and the wind has turned the pages. You are not being judged tonight. You are not being mistaken for someone else. You are exactly who you are, and that is enough. Close your eyes. There are no wrong choices here. No false arrests. No crooked peace. Only breath. Only stillness. Only the sound of silence where a gavel never dropped. Let the book close. Let the names rest. And let yourself drift into the soft, unmarked space where justice no longer limps and nothing is decided too soon. Sleep without the badge. Sleep without the weight. Sleep with only the truth that you are safe, that you are seen, and that you are free to begin again. Elroy Cask, the gambler who bet his life and won nothing. Elroy wasn't a killer, not at first. He wasn't brave either. He was something much quieter. A man who got good at slipping between cracks, smiling when he lost, bluffing when he won. A man who lived in the corners of saloons, always just close enough to the stove to feel the heat, but never so close that anyone noticed how cold his hands were. He wore the same coat every day, gray, worn, stitched with thread that didn't match. Said he won it in a game of 5-card draw, though most believed he stole it off a man who didn't need it anymore. He wasn't fast with a gun. That was the strange part. He carried one, sure, but not like a gunslinger. Not with the pride of someone who knew how to use it. His weapon was the cards, and his mouth, and the way he could read a man's soul in the twitch of a finger or the drop of an eye. People came to his table for money, but they stayed because they wanted to be seen, even if only for a moment. He played for everything: cash, land, gold teeth, wedding rings, horses, stories. There were rumors he once won a woman's freedom. that she sat across from him with shaking hands while her husband bet her away like a bag of flour. Elroy didn't say anything, just played, won, and gave her the key without asking her name. But he never kept what he won. Not really. His boots had holes. His belt was borrowed. He stayed in boarding houses that smelled of mildew and regret. Always moving, always one town ahead of someone else's rage. Because no one wins forever. And Elroy had a habit of taking more than just money from people. He took their pride, their last excuse, sometimes their luck. There was one game, though, that never left the whispers. A table in Sundown Ridge, 5 men, 1 empty chair. Elroy sat at that chair late, offered nothing but a smile and a knife he placed gently on the table. No one asked why. They played until sunrise. No one remembers the cards. Only that by dawn, 3 men were dead. 1 went blind. And Elroy just walked out, alone, holding nothing but that same knife. He never explained. And the town never forgave. After that, he changed. Played less. Watched more. Sat at tables without chips in front of him. Said he was done betting with borrowed blood. He started losing on purpose. Let the younger players win. Gave away his coins, slow and deliberate, like a man trying to pay back a debt that couldn't be counted. Then, one day, he vanished. They found his coat draped over a bar stool in a ghost town with a note in the pocket. I bet everything. It wasn't enough. No body, no trail, just silence, and a half-full bottle of bourbon still warm. You wouldn't last a day, not because Elroy would cheat you, but because you'd believe him. You'd think the charm was real. You'd trust the grin. You'd think luck is something you can hold in your hand. But Elroy knew better. Luck isn't a gift. It's a debt, and it always comes due. Still, some say he did one last good thing. A boy in Copper Bend found a deck of cards tied with a red ribbon. Inside, each card had a note written on it. Fold. Walk away. Apologize. Tell the truth. And on the joker, in his same tidy scrawl, you're still alive. Don't bet that too. The table's empty. The cards are face down. The bets are off. No chips in the pot. No strangers staring from behind crooked smiles. Just stillness. Just the slow shuffle of dreams waiting to be dealt. You are not gambling tonight. You are not bluffing. You are not risking a thing. Close your eyes. The house doesn't always win. Not tonight. Tonight, there's no house, no odds, no debts, just rest. Let the past fold itself away. Let the ghosts of chance find someone else. You are safe. And sleep is not a game. It's a gift. Take it gently, without fear, and drift into the dark like a card falling face down on a table no one will ever sit at again. Iris Delane, the train robber who left flowers behind. No one expected it to be her. That was her magic. Iris Delane didn't look like danger. She looked like a schoolteacher, or a seamstress, or a widow waiting politely for a carriage. Pale gloves, a small bonnet, hair pinned with mathematical precision. She carried a parasol even when the sun wasn't out, and she always smiled when she stepped onto a train. Ticket folded just so, eyes scanning the car, not for where to sit, but who to choose. They called her the Orchid after a while, because wherever she struck, someone found a flower left behind, tucked under a seat, pressed between the pages of a stolen manifest, pinned to the lapel of a guard who never saw her coming. Not always orchids, sometimes lilies, sometimes violets, but always fresh, always deliberate, always left where the story couldn't end without a question. Her heists weren't loud. No explosions, no horses racing beside the engine. Just stillness. The lights would flicker. The guards would grow drowsy. Someone would say they heard humming from the last car, and then the train would arrive, missing something. A lockbox, a passenger, a conductor who no longer remembered his own name. Iris never took more than what she needed. She never shot anyone. She preferred chloroform, charm, and sleight of hand. Once, a banker swore she stole an entire briefcase from beneath his coat while he was still wearing it. When asked how, he said, "She asked me a question, and I forgot I was alive." But her targets were always the same: rail executives, land barons, arms dealers, men who spoke softly in private cars about coal and conquest. She boarded their trains like a ghost in perfume, robbed them blind, and left with a nod. And when the marshals came asking, the other passengers just shook their heads. "I remember her," they'd say, "but not what she did." She rode alone, mostly. Sometimes with a boy who called himself Finch, bright-eyed, quick-footed, and fiercely loyal. He said Iris saved him from a bounty hunter when he was 9. She taught him how to read, how to pick a lock without scratching the brass, how to disappear while someone's still staring at you. But Iris wasn't just a thief. She was a message, a protest in silk and sugar. She sent money back to towns gutted by rail construction, left envelopes of cash in burned out homes, paid off hospital debts, school books, coffins, never claimed credit, just flowers. Always flowers, and sometimes a card that read, "Not everything stolen was yours to begin with." Eventually, the rail companies grew desperate, put a bounty on her head bigger than most murderers. "Arrest her with care," the posters said, armed with charm and poison. But she was never caught. Her last job was the Great Divide Express. No one remembers how she got aboard. All anyone saw was a woman waving goodbye from the rear platform as the train entered a tunnel and never came out. No body, no trace, just a bouquet of white orchids placed gently on the track, tied with red ribbon. The scent lingered for days. You wouldn't last a day, not because Iris would trick you, but because you'd fall for her. You'd ask her name, offer to carry her bag. You'd believe her when she said she was just passing through. And by the time the train stopped, your wallet would be gone, and your heart would miss her more than your money. Still, she wasn't cruel. She once returned a wedding ring to a woman in Kansas with a note that said, "He didn't deserve it, but you do." A girl in Wyoming swore Iris handed her a book on botany and said, "The world's built on lies, but flowers tell the truth." The train is still. The tracks are quiet. The lanterns have been dimmed, and the night carries no whistles. There is no motion, no theft, no charm sliding across the seat beside you. Let the wheels stop turning. Let the briefcases remain untouched. Let your name stay yours. Close your eyes. There's no need to hide your valuables. No reason to watch the doors. You're not a target. You're not a mark. You are just a passenger now, peaceful, forgotten, and free. Let the hum fade. Let the flowers bloom in your dreams. And sleep like someone who's been spared, quietly, by someone who knew you didn't need stealing from, only saving. Marshal Jonah Bellamy, the man who arrested his own past. He wore the same coat for 20 years, long, oil-stained, heavy with dust and regrets. His badge, dulled with time, hung from a chain around his neck instead of being pinned over the heart. Said it was closer to the truth that way. Jonah Bellamy wasn't born a marshal. He earned it the hard way, walking through blood and broken oaths, leaving pieces of himself in every town that begged for order and every outlaw he buried without ever learning their names. He came from somewhere back east. Not that he ever said. Carried a book of Psalms in his pocket and never opened it. Carried a second revolver, under his left arm and used it often. He wasn't fast, but he never missed. Because Jonah didn't shoot until he was sure. Dead sure. He called it merciful clarity. His name carried weight in the territories, not for the laws he enforced, but for the lines he never crossed, until he did. They say he shot a boy once, young, barely out of childhood, running from a crime he didn't commit. Jonah swore he saw a gun, swore it was instinct. But afterward, something changed. He stopped looking men in the eye, stopped taking new cases, began chasing ghosts no one else believed in. He started revisiting the towns he'd cleaned up, towns where his name still echoed in bar rooms like the ghost of a sermon. And in each one, he sought out the people he'd once arrested, the families of the men he'd gunned down. Not to apologize, not exactly, but to listen. One woman threw a bottle at him. Another kissed his hand. A preacher cursed his name and then asked him to stay the night because the roads were dangerous. He stayed, slept outside, said he didn't belong under roofs anymore. He kept a journal, filled not with names, but with questions. Did I make it worse? Did he deserve it? Did I? He called it the ledger, said it was the only thing that weighed more than his gun. Then one summer, Jonah walked into a courthouse in Larkspur Valley, laid down his badge, his guns, and the ledger, walked outside, sat under a tree by the river, and waited. Some say he was waiting for someone to kill him, a son, a brother, a stranger carrying old anger. Some say he was waiting for a sign. Others say he just wanted to watch the water one last time before it forgot his name. He died there. Not by bullet, not by blade, just stopped. Like a clock that decided time had gone on long enough. They buried him where he sat. No stone. Just a wooden sign carved with the words, "He chased justice and found himself." You wouldn't last a day. Not because Jonah would draw on you, but because you'd ask him to forgive himself. You'd see the sadness in his posture and try to lift it. But he carried it on purpose. It was his compass, broken, but still pointing somewhere. Still, he left things behind. A woman found a letter under her door that simply said, "He didn't steal your father's horse. I just needed someone to blame." A child in Prescott received a box of 10 stars, each etched with a different word: truth, mercy, delay, doubt. The badge has been laid down. The river runs quiet. The past no longer paces outside the door. There is no sentence to pass, no case to close, no man waiting in the dark with guilt tucked into his coat. Close your eyes. You are not the law. You are not the outlaw. You are not the weight of decisions made in heat and dust. You are breath. You are stillness. You are the slow bend of water over stone, carving nothing, demanding nothing, only moving forward. Let Jonah rest. Let the questions stay unanswered. Let the badge rust gently in the dirt, where no one asks who was right, only who remained. Sleep now. The chase is over. Marshal Jonah Bellamy, the man who arrested his own past. He wore the same coat for 20 years, long, oil-stained, heavy with dust and regrets. His badge, dulled with time, hung from a chain around his neck instead of being pinned over the heart. Said it was closer to the truth that way. Jonah Bellamy wasn't born a marshal. He earned it the hard way, walking through blood and broken oaths, leaving pieces of himself in every town that begged for order and every outlaw he buried without ever learning their names. He came from somewhere back east, not that he ever said. Carried a book of Psalms in his pocket and never opened it. Carried a second revolver under his left arm and used it often. He wasn't fast, but he never missed. because Jonah didn't shoot until he was sure, dead sure. He called it merciful clarity. His name carried weight in the territories, not for the laws he enforced, but for the lines he never crossed, until he did. They say he shot a boy once, young, barely out of childhood, running from a crime he didn't commit. Jonah swore he saw a gun, swore it was instinct. But afterwards, something changed. He stopped looking men in the eye, stopped taking new cases, began chasing ghosts no one else believed in. He started revisiting the towns he'd cleaned up, towns where his name still echoed in bar rooms like the ghost of a sermon. And in each one, he sought out the people he'd once arrested, the families of the men he'd gunned down. Not to apologize, not exactly, but to listen. One woman threw a bottle at him. Another kissed his hand. A preacher cursed his name and then asked him to stay the night because the roads were dangerous. He stayed, slept outside, said he didn't belong under roofs anymore. He kept a journal, filled not with names, but with questions. Did I make it worse? Did he deserve it? Did I? He called it the ledger. Said it was the only thing that weighed more than his gun. Then, one summer, Jonah walked into a courthouse in Larkspur Valley, laid down his badge, his guns, and the ledger, walked outside, sat under a tree by the river, and waited. Some say he was waiting for someone to kill him. A son, a brother, a stranger carrying old anger. Some say he was waiting for a sign. Others say he just wanted to watch the water one last time before it forgot his name. He died there, not by bullet, not by blade, just stopped, like a clock that decided time had gone on long enough. They buried him where he sat. No stone, just a wooden sign carved with the words, "He chased justice and found himself." You wouldn't last a day. Not because Jonah would draw on you, but because you'd ask him to forgive himself. You'd see the sadness in his posture and try to lift it. But he carried it on purpose. It was his compass. Broken, but still pointing somewhere. Still, he left things behind. A woman found a letter under her door that simply said, "He didn't steal your father's horse. I just needed someone to blame." A child in Prescott received a box of tin stars, each etched with a different word: truth, mercy, delay, doubt. The badge has been laid down. The river runs quiet. The past no longer paces outside the door. There is no sentence to pass, no case to close, no man waiting in the dark with guilt tucked into his coat. Close your eyes. You are not the law. You are not the outlaw. You are not the weight of decisions made in heat and dust. You are breath. You are stillness. You are the slow bend of water over stone, carving nothing, demanding nothing, only moving forward. Let Jonah rest. Let the questions stay unanswered. Let the badge rust gently in the dirt, where no one asks who was right, only who remained. Sleep now. The chase is over.